Hey you, I'm getting quite used to having you around. It's Lucy Luck, and I like to play non-traditional cozy games and make them cozy. Lately, I've been absolutely hooked on Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and thought it could be nice to do a bit of Codex reading so we can all learn a bit more about the rich historical context that makes the game so great. So without further ado, get comfy cozy, pop on some headphones if you like, and let's go on an adventure. Now, I don't have absolutely everything in the Codex unlocked just yet, and even if I did, unfortunately, reading everything from it this evening would take hours. With that being said, if you end up really enjoying this, please let me know, and I'd be happy to read more for you. But today, we are going to get cozy and settled in to my little room in Gutenberg and start reading the general section of the Codex. For those of you that don't know, I studied art history in college for my minor and had a particular fascination with medieval art, so I was absolutely thrilled to see how beautiful and accurate the artwork is in this game. However, despite some moderately relevant education, I may make some pronunciation mistakes while reading the Codex. If I do, please be sure to ruthlessly tear me apart in the comments, as is customary in YouTube culture. Arma Diaboli. The Second Lateran Council, 1139, forbade priests from wearing luxurious clothing, nuns from singing alongside monks, and good Christians from using crossbows against other Christians and Catholics. The crossbow was dubbed a diabolical weapon, in Latin, Arma Diaboli, because it could easily pierce even the strongest armor of the time. And unlike the bow, a hit from it almost guaranteed death. However, the crossbow continued to be used and improved. The original wooden limbs were gradually replaced by stronger and stiffer composite limbs, and eventually by steel. Along with these developments came the introduction of several new drawing mechanisms ranging from human arm power to levers and windlasses. Even the strongest crossbow, however, could not pierce high-quality steel breastplates, and ultimately the title of the most lethal weapon passed to firearms. Armor. In the 14th century, manufacturing capabilities expanded, leading to the production of stronger and often combined armors. Older chainmail armors transitioned to plate armor due to advancements in steel processing and the ability to forge larger pieces of metal on automatic hammers. Soldiers' heads were protected by helmets such as the cerveliere, known as the iron hat, bassinets, and helms. Armors were crafted by armorers or helmet makers, typically from a single piece of hardened plate, skullcaps, bassinets, or riveted together from several smaller pieces, cerveliere, salle. The finest armor of the early 15th century was considered that made in German and Italian lands. Combined type armors were used by heavy cavalry. They consisted of chainmail supplemented with plate armor, covering the limbs into simpler forms of cuirasses, platecoats, and quilted jackets. Some platecoats and breastplates were equipped with a hook for the knight's spear. If the armor lacked a hook, the spear was inserted into a slot in the shield, which covered the left arm, controlling the reins and the lower part of the helmet. A widely used helmet was the bassinet, salle, with a distinctly shaped visor nicknamed the dog snout. Additionally, iron hats with one or two eye slots are frequently depicted in visual sources. Shoulders were protected either by chainmail sleeves or small pauldrons. An indispensable part of the armor was the shield. Armory. The armament of the military garrison, or the state armory of a town's militia. Swords, spears, halberds, bows and arrows, crossbows, armor, helmets, and other offensive and defensive weapons, including firearms. In times of danger, it was the duty of all townspeople to join the defense of the town, and for this purpose, the town had an armory with weapons for the inhabitants. Even in times of peace, townspeople were often required to take turns on guard duty. Army. European medieval armies were based on the feudal obligation of nobles to serve their liege lord. This system, which originated from late Roman traditions, primarily applied to defensive warfare where there was no opportunity for plunder. If a ruler wanted to lead an offensive campaign, he had to not only promise his knights the prospect of loot, but also pay them. In France and Italy, where wars were relatively frequent, mercenary armed bands, routs, known as free companies, began to emerge. These companies fought for wages during wars, but extorted protection money from peasants and robbed travelers during peacetime. In the 14th century, mercenary service became a profession for thousands of impoverished nobles. Among the largest groups were the French Bandes Blanches, the English White Company, and the Italian Compagnia di San Giorgio. In Bohemia, there was the retinue surrounding Jan Sokol of Lamberg and Hynek I of Kunstadt. Astrology. In the Middle Ages, alchemy and apothecary were naturally linked with astrology, which was regarded as applied astronomy. Since ancient times, fate has been considered the expression of divine will, emanating from the heavens and giving mankind signs in the constellations of stars and planets. Indeed, the Arabs and ancient Greeks had made tables, overviews, and catalogues of stars and constellations, as well as calendars used for navigation. The movement of celestial bodies had an influence on political issues, on decisions about war or marriage, even medical treatments, food preparation, or tasks associated with agriculture were deemed to be subject to celestial mechanics. Based on the constellations, every person was assigned a sign of the zodiac, which determined his health, career, and even social relationships throughout his life. Astrologers used many devices in their work, such as astrolabes, sextants, quadrants, sundials, and other devices for accurate monitoring of the skies. Unlike today, astrology was a highly regarded and respected science, and many astronomers of that time were also astrologers. Beverages. There were shortages of clean drinking water due to pollution of watercourses by human activities around rural settlements, and fruit juices were available only in season. Hence, everyone, including children, drank beer. The beer brewed at home was weaker and heavier than today, containing 1 to 5% alcohol, and was served in place of soup. It had no head of foam, was brewed from wheat, so-called wheat beer, or from barley, old beer. Only in the 15th century did hops come to be added for better beer quality, bringing out a bitter flavor. Wine was drunk primarily at the court and in the monasteries. It differed from today's wine with its spiced, very sweet taste. It was condensed into a thick syrup and diluted with water. Spirits were altogether rare. Distillation took place in small volumes. Fruit and cereal distillates were again weaker than today's, about 15 to 20%. The most popular drink was mead, made from fermented honey dissolved in water. Black Chronicle. Black books, also called pitch books or blood books, held information and records of delinquents and people suspected of capital crimes. The records were kept by the clerk of the municipal court of the interrogation of the prisoners, sometimes under torture. The oldest preserved black books date from the early 16th century. Books and libraries. Collecting and preserving written records goes back to ancient times, but the barbarians who sacked Rome in the 5th century destroyed a great many, so a lot of rare manuscripts have only been preserved indirectly via the Arab world. Various materials were used to write on: pieces of fabric, papyrus or parchment, fine animal leather. Parchment was expensive and was therefore used primarily for codices and deeds of privilege due to its significantly longer lifespan. The most widely used material was paper. The writing implements used included the quill pen, engraver, brush or reed cane, charcoal, and chalk sticks. The transcription of books was the monk's domain. Each book was unique, carefully decorated, the text enriched with bounteous illuminations, all done by hand. The production of a book took many years, making them very expensive. Major works of that time came into being in Latin, but during the Middle Ages, some literature began to appear in the respective national languages. Books were very heavy, therefore difficult to steal, and contained a great many pages. Although there were some miniature portable forms, there were also books so massive that they couldn't be carried by one person. Not only because of their value, but also to protect them from damage. Important writings were often kept in chests or cabinets. Later, so-called chain libraries come into being, where the volumes would be tethered to the reading desk by a chain. Libraries were needed by administrative offices and places of learning, especially universities. The largest collections were to be found at the Sorbonne, Oxford, and the University of Prague, where there were books donated by Emperor Charles IV himself. Notable members of the nobility or the church also boasted private collections, despite the fact that not all of them could read. Carts and wagons. In the Middle Ages, carts served for travel, agricultural work, and military purposes. Among the simplest carts were two-wheeled carts alongside ladder wagons, known as ladder racks, or carts with solid sides. The oldest carts, with tall wheels, had a single central axle connected to the chassis. From the 14th century, two-axle, four-wheeled carts were used. The front axle was not steerable, resulting in a very small turning radius. These carts also lacked benches, so the coachman either rode on one of the horses or walked alongside the cart. In times of war, carts could be used as mobile field fortifications, a strategy notably highlighted during the Hussite Wars, where the strategic use of wagon forts won several battles for the Hussites. Chivalric orders. The first knightly orders emerged at the end of the 11th century, primarily in connection with the Crusades. They were a combination of religious order and military organization, appealing to Christian values, as well as chivalric traditions and service to society. Besides noble knights, the members of the order also included a large number of common people: foot soldiers, archers, sailors, and auxiliary military professions. Becoming a member of the knightly order might have seemed like a suitable career choice for a young medieval man, but often the opposite was true. Life was subject to strict rules and organization, often requiring celibacy, life in a closed convent, or long fasts. For example, the Templars forbade paying ransom for their members, so falling into enemy hands meant imprisonment or death. In the high Middle Ages of the 13th and 14th centuries, the orders underwent their greatest expansion, with their armies numbering tens of thousands of fighters, and in some cases they even found their own states, such as in the Baltic region or later in Malta. In more recent history, their religious and ecclesiastical context has faded, and the orders have focused more on charity. The most famous knightly orders were the Templars, the Order of St. John, or Knights of Malta, the Teutonic Order, the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Knights of St. Lazarus. Chronicles. Since ancient times, educated members of the court or clergy dedicated themselves to writing chronicles, i.e. literary works, describing contemporary events, the lives of rulers, great battles, and sometimes everyday life. These records were kept chronologically, and beyond the mere dates, they provide a rich source of period information. Chronicles are one of the best sources for studying and reconstructing the history of a country, notable figures, places, buildings, and general realities of the time. There are different types of chronicles: world, national, episcopal, monastic, royal, dynastic, provincial, tracking genealogy, urban, biographical or autobiographical, travel journals, and more. Among the most significant Czech chronicles are those of Cosmas and Dalimil, the canon of Vyšehrad, the writings of the Xoxo monk, and the Zbraslav Chronicle. The chroniclers generally enjoyed the most favorable conditions. Most lived at courts, had free access to older written records and court life, and ample time devoted solely to writing. Although chronicles are the most valuable historic sources, it is important to consider their historical ideological subtext when reading and reconstructing them. For example, Cosmas wrote his chronicle with unabashed sympathy for the Przemyslid dynasty, while Dalimil showed great antipathy against the Germans. Both occasionally mixed facts with myths and legend, e.g., the beginning of Czech history with the building of the Tower of Babel. Some of the books to be found in the game are a transliterations from chapters from Cosmas or Dalimil, e.g., the account of Forefather Czech, the Maiden's War, and others. Churches. The church was not just a place of worship, but also an important communication center in medieval society. Its basic areas included the nave or naves, main and side, and the presbytery, also known as the sanctuary. This housed the main altar, where Mass was celebrated. Most churches were oriented with the sanctuary on the eastern side. The baptismal font was placed near the main entrance. Another important feature was the pulpit, from which the priest addressed the people. Unlike today, sermons were conducted separately from the Mass. During the church service, the priest faced away from the people, and according to the Pope's decree, Mass was conducted in Latin, which no one understood. This was compensated by rich visual decorations on the church walls, which aimed to explain the mysteries of the liturgy and especially biblical scenes to ordinary illiterate people. After the church service, the church space was used, for example, as a temporary storage for grain and other traded goods, or as a gathering place for the community to discuss important matters. Coin minting. Manual coin minting was a complex process in the Middle Ages. After the raw silver was mined and processed, ingots, known as cans, were made from the precious metal alloy. The ingots were then hammered into thin, narrow strips by the minters. from which squares, so-called farfuel, were cut with large shears and then rounded. The slices were then hammered into a circular shape on the anvil and then smoothed by a process known as clipping. Only then should the coiner, known as a prêcheur, step in to insert the coin between two dies at the minting tables and strike it with a hammer. Since great strength was required, the coiner had to be a mountain of a man. One hand was needed to hold the two stamps together, the other to pound them with a heavy hammer. Later on, when thalers replaced Prague groschen, 2 people were needed for minting. The activity was very noisy and had to be well guarded. Most engravers eventually became partially deaf and were not allowed to wear clothing with loose folds or pockets, which could be used to conceal something. Imperfect coins were collected and subsequently melted down to be reminted. Combat technique. In the High Middle Ages, new elements of combat techniques and weapons and armor emerged. Curved sabers became popular, and chainmail was replaced by plate armor. Knights preferred heavier swords, crossbows, and impact weapons such as maces and flails. Only wealthy nobles could afford full armor. Usually, only partial metal armor was worn, and more than for protection, the focus was on combat technique. For this reason, sword fighting developed in 2 ways: knightly swordsmanship, fighting with a spear, sword, and shield in full heavy armor, or common swordsmanship, for lightly armored fighters who fought with swords and common weapons such as falchions, flails, scythes, staffs, etc. In battles between lightly armored and heavily armored fighters, speed, agility, and cleverness often won. Therefore, swordplay also interested the poorer parts of society. They gradually started to be educated in sword fighting schools. The training was not very professional, being based more on dexterity, readiness, and the use of various available means besides weapons. Precise contemporary descriptions of duels are lacking, so historians rely on mentions in literature or preserved visual material. Construction works. Workshops sprang up around every major construction site and employed stonemasons, stone dressers, carpenters, blacksmiths, carters, rope makers, sawyers, coopers, and the like. Unskilled work was done by day laborers. Stone or wooden elements and auxiliary structures were manufactured directly at the works on site, known as the construction yard. The craftsmen often used specialized tools such as wooden hoists, winches, pulleys, and rotating cranes, powered by hand or by large tread wheels. Quite a number of people worked in construction, among whom natural and informal bonds were formed. The workshop also provided plenty of customers for the surrounding vendors, innkeepers, and merchants. Most of the employees stayed overnight in the area. The workshop was run by a master builder who allocated tasks, managed the building process, and dealt with the patron, sponsor of the building. Counterfeiting. At the turn of the 14th century, when the quality of Czech currency deteriorated due to the replacement of silver with cheaper metals, counterfeiting also improved. This happened despite strict prosecutions and the death penalties that were imposed for such offenses. One example of such counterfeiting included lead coins plated with silver. The authenticity could be detected by biting the coin. Lead is soft, while silver is not. Counterfeiters' workshops were often hidden in karst and sandstone caves and equipped with small laboratories, as silvering the metal was a chemical process requiring special tools. Courtliness. Courtliness or courtesy stand for courtly etiquette. The cradle of courtesy was France and later England, which shaped the patterns of beauty, education, diplomacy, and the arts. The origins of courtesy are considered to be the chivalry of a knight towards his lady, adoration, versifying, greetings, gestures, and obedience. Not overlooked were rules for conduct during feasts, stylized movement, e.g. mounting a horse or sitting down at table, as well as protecting ladies and the weak, or the manner of divulging one's own feelings and emotions. Important elements in this were language, the playing of musical instruments, and dance. Many considered courtesy to be a fete, but despite this, for quite a long time it dominated high society's approach to manners and the arts. Damascus Steel. Damascus Steel, also known as Damask, Damascene, or Damask Steel, is a high-quality metal alloy produced since the early Middle Ages in Syria, Indonesia, and Central Asia. It was imported into Europe from the Syrian city of Damascus and was used by the Franks, Vikings, and Spaniards. However, the steel was not accessible to everyone, and its price was very high. Damascus steel is renowned for its distinctive composition and processing, which creates alternating layers of metal. Each item thus acquired characteristic patterns known as marbling, which are entirely unique. This unique composition gave the steel exceptional properties, particularly very high hardness and durability compared to ordinary steel. For this reason, the complex and costly production of this steel was strictly guarded as a secret. Some, of course, attempted to replicate it, creating so-called welded, false Damascus from lower quality materials, which resembled the real thing in appearance but was nowhere near its equal in terms of properties. Devils. Demons are mythical and fairy tale inhabitants of hell, specific to Slavic cultural context. While in the rest of Europe, people refer to demonic creatures as devils and attribute purely negative intentions to them. In Czech folklore, we lean towards the image of demons as mischievous, malicious, and often foolish beings depicted with goat horns, a tail, and hooves on their feet, subservient to the will of the ruler of hell, Lucifer. Medieval magical thinking attributed various qualities to demons. Many a castle had a notorious gate to hell in its basement. Many a mill or abandoned building served as their abode. Demons smelled bad, caused disturbances, and were blamed for hens not laying eggs, milk souring, or food spoiling. While the church refuted other originally pagan beliefs, it assimilated demons for its purposes, portraying them as tempters and punishment for believers who weren't devout. Dugout shelters. A dugout shelter is a form of smaller and more makeshift housing. One room dug into the ground with steps leading down into it. It was covered with a simple thatched roof. These were home to poor people or a provisional shelter for woodcutters, charcoal burners, and shepherds who did not live in them all year round. Execution place. Execution sites were located on hills, crossroads, and outside the city, as they were considered unclean places. These were desolate locations that everyone avoided. No craftsman wanted to work there for fear of losing their honor. The only person who frequently moved nearby was the executioner, who often lived close to the execution site. Ordinary people visited the execution site only for one purpose: when the execution was taking place. Executions were a popular public spectacle, often attracting the entire town. Capital punishment could only be carried out by certain towns, and not all of them had an executioner. Fabrics. Both plant and animal fibers were used to make textiles. In the beginning, mainly bast fibers, willow, linden, and various grasses were used. Later, plants particularly suitable for textile production, such as flax and hemp, were also bred. Hemp fiber is strong, coarse, and darker than flax, but not flexible, making it less suitable for clothing, and instead was used more for ropes or cordage. Cotton was unknown in Europe until the late Middle Ages. The most common animal raw material was wool, which has good thermal insulation properties, high absorbency, elasticity, and dyes well. It was combed or sheared from sheep. Silk was imported from Asia as a rare and luxurious commodity. Firearms. Firearms first appeared in Europe in the 14th century and began to see widespread use by the early 15th century. In the Kingdom of Bohemia, they became pivotal during the Hussite Wars. Interestingly, the Hussites influenced the naming of early firearms, which spread worldwide. For example, the English word pistol for the lightest handheld firearm originates from the Czech pistola, originally meaning a pipe or flute. This weapon featured a relatively short forged barrel, with a socket mounted on a wooden shaft, allowing the shooter to hold it under their arm. The ammunition included solid balls, grape shot, or specially shaped projectiles that whistled in flight to frighten horses. Gunpowder was poured into the barrel, sealed with wadding, and the projectile was inserted, all then tamped down with a ramrod. It was ignited through a touch hole using a smoldering fuse or a heated piece of iron. Early firearms were highly inaccurate and had a short range, barely a few dozen meters, but even at that distance, they could pierce solid armor. Another popular handheld firearm in Central Europe was the hook gun. It featured a steel or bronze barrel with an average caliber of 20 to 30 millimeter, mounted on a wooden stock. Like the pistola, it had a hook under the muzzle, which allowed the weapon to be braced against a wall, parapet, or at the edge of a battle wagon during firing, significantly reducing its heavy recoil. For besieging cities or fortresses, much larger and heavier firearms were used, such as wall guns, howitzers, and cannons. Forgery. In the medieval period, forging various documents was quite common. Few people were literate, so it was difficult for many to assess the authenticity of any given record. High-ranking lords often could not read and dictated documents to scribes. Trust in the written word was therefore low, with an expectation that correspondence could be falsified. More reliance was placed on spoken word, promises, and the honor of the other person. Furniture. By the end of the 15th century, Bohemian furniture was made from planks with more or less complex construction. Oak, fir, walnut, linden, ash, or spruce were used. The surface was coated with beeswax or linseed oil. Towards the end of the Gothic period, shellac polish was used. Coloring was done by smoking, water from fermented cabbage, and bleaching with lime water. Tables and seating furniture had the same construction with flat sides or boards in the shape of an X. Chests varied in size and were used to store bulk materials, clothing, or other small possessions. City dwellers slept in beds with curtains, while in the countryside the furnishings were very simple. Peasants made furniture from split and cleaned planks and posts. In a peasant's hut, people slept on hay laid on the ground. Cabinet makers and carvers decorated the furniture with ornaments. The most expensive furniture was adorned with metal elements, which not only enhanced its appearance, but also served as reinforcing function. In KCD, most of the furniture is made according to medieval examples from the 12th and 16th centuries. Alrighty. Unfortunately, that is all the time I have this evening. Let me know if this was nice and cozy for you, and I'd be happy to read more in the future. Thank you to everyone that wished me well post-surgery and for everyone's patience while I've been recovering. At the moment, I'm unsure when I'll be able to upload next. I'm leaving the US next week to spend about a month or so in Canada, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to get videos done while I'm there or not. I'll try to figure something out and keep you updated. But I've been up to a lot of other cool stuff for you to check out outside of these videos that you can keep up with in the Comfy Cozy Discord, Blue Sky, and or Patreon. A special thank you to my top patrons, Daniel P., JT, Carlia, Mechexican, and Stebu, as well as all of the other patrons that make this channel the best it can be. I hope you have a nice, relaxed day, evening, or have sweet dreams, and I look forward to seeing you next time.